Hello and welcome. You're watching the US Election Watch. I'm Vedant Agarwal. Well, the focus on the show this evening is very much on the swing states. Why are Trump and Harris really eyeing for the swing states? Who has the lead? What does it really mean for the Democrat and Republican candidates? And also the Israel-Gaza issue, which has really emerged as one of the central talking points for both Trump and Harris, particularly for the undecided voters. We'll decode all of that and more in the show, but first up, the headlines. Harris and Trump gear up to target the Sunbelt states. Harris and her vice presidential candidate to woo undecided voters in Georgia. Donald Trump suggests he may skip the ABC debate with Kamala Harris. Trump criticizes ABC's quote-unquote fake news and biased coverage. Trump and Harris campaigns clash over the September debate rules. Harris's campaign breaks the donation record. It raises $540 million US. The campaign sees a surge during the DNC as they raise $82 million in just 4 days. Trump allies face hearing in Arizona election subversion case. Arizona judge to decide on the dismissal of the fake elector case. The Trump campaign targets key swing state Michigan. Trump and his running mate in Michigan, they say the economy and inflation are the big focus areas. And well, our big focus, with just 70 days to go, the US elections race is heating up. While the party convention for both Republicans and Democrats have ended, in the sprint to November 5, key events remain for both parties. Well, let's take a look at some of them. Well, this week it's Trump and Harris campaigns targeting the Sunbelt states. On September the 10th, Harris and Trump will go head-to-head for the first time. The first early voting will also get underway in September. Also, North Carolina is the first state to send mail-in ballots on September the 6th. But other states will also follow suit in the weeks to come, including Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, on September the 18th, Trump also faces sentencing for his conviction on 34 counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payments before the 2016 election. However, that date could also see a delay due to the SC immunity hearing. On October the 1st, the first vice presidential debate will take place. And this, of course, as both Harris and Trump focus on battleground states in the last stretch of the polls race. And November the 5th is when the big day, the US heads to the ballot. So, of course, it's going to be a hectic last phase of the US elections. The focus very much is on the swing states, or the Sunbelt states, as it were, given the fact that this is where largely the deciding, the undecided voters, I beg your pardon, will really be sort of crucial. Now, remember, the grassroots campaigning this week, mainly in Georgia and Michigan. 7 states, commonly referred to as swing states, are crucial, with experts saying that they are key to winning the election. Both the parties will now focus on the undecided voters in these states. The Sun Belt includes states such as Georgia, Arizona, also Nevada. And the blue wall consists of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, in recent polls, Kamala Harris has taken a consistent, though a narrow, lead in the blue wall states. Now, she holds an average lead of about 3 points in Wisconsin and Michigan, but only 1 point in Pennsylvania, where both campaigns are spending the most. Now, in the Sun Belt, former President Donald Trump holds an almost 2-point lead in Georgia, and it is within 1 point in each of the other 3, North Carolina, Nevada, and Arizona. Let's take a look at this report, which really decodes what the situation is in the Sunbelt states. Where are the undecided voters really swinging? Because there has been a clear outreach to the undecided voters in both the camps. Take a look at this report.
With just about 70 days left for the D-Day, the US election race appears to be speeding up. About 240 million people are eligible to vote this time, but experts suggest that only a handful of them will help decide who sits in the Oval Office. 7 states, commonly referred to as swing states, are crucial, with experts saying they are key to winning the election. Both the parties will now focus on the undecided voters in these states. Out of the 7 swing states, Georgia appears to be critical for both leaders as they struggle to gain voters' attention. On Wednesday, Kamala Harris is set to travel to Georgia to hold her first campaign event in the state. She will be accompanied by her recently anointed running mate, Tim Walz. Harris will try to reach out to rural areas where the former president is strong. She will also be going to suburban and urban districts where large black communities are present. The latest poll tracker puts Trump 0.6% ahead of Harris in Georgia, with Harris on 46% and Trump on 46.6%, which suggests that the state is open territory for the two candidates. Senator Lindsey Graham, who is one of Trump's closest surrogates, recently shed light on the importance of Georgia. Graham said that he would soon be accompanying Trump to Georgia, adding that Georgia is for ours to lose. With the battleground state still open to both the candidates, the race between Trump and Harris remains neck and neck. With Vishal Vivek, Gargi Rawat for NDTV World.
And well, even though the race is neck and neck, where does the donation drive really stand? Well, Harris's campaign breaks the donation record. She's raised $540 million. Well, this is there's certain cash advantage over Trump as far as Kamala Harris is concerned. She's raised over 4 times the funds that Trump's campaign has raised, and she's across the $500 million milestone as well. And it was really during the 4-day DNC convention where the major chunk of the donation came. So, of course, a clear record-breaking donation for Kamala Harris. Take a look at this report that really decodes where the two camps stand as far as donations are concerned.
US Vice President Kamala Harris jumped into the presidential race last month, and it's shaking things up in a big way. Her campaign has absolutely soared, raising over 4 times more money than former US President Donald Trump did in July. Democrats are claiming that groups supporting Kamala Harris have already raked in more than $500 million since Joe Biden stepped out of the race. The Biden, now Harris campaign committee, raised $516.8 million, and Trump's campaign committee raised $268.5 million in total between January 2023 and July 31st, 2024, the most recent date for which Federal Election Commission filings are available. Harris also ended July with far more cash on hand than Trump, with $219.7 million to Trump's $151.3 million, erasing a previous cash advantage the Trump campaign had at the end of June before President Joe Biden dropped out of the race. The Harris campaign raised $204.5 million in July alone, while the Trump campaign raised $47.5 million, shaking up what was previously a more evenly matched cash race, as Harris entered the race on the 21st of July and quickly posted huge fundraising numbers, with her campaign reporting $81 million in donations in the first 24 hours. The fundraising surge reportedly continued into August. Harris and her allies raised a combined $540 million since Biden dropped out, including some $82 million during the Democratic National Convention. Kamala Harris also shook things up by naming Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her vice president pick, and it paid off big time. Her campaign pulled in $36 million in just 1 day after the announcement. So how much are Harris and Trump spending? Historically, the Biden-Harris campaign has burned through cash faster than Trump. By June, they had spent $189.7 million compared to Trump's $92.1 million. Last month alone, Harris's team shelled out $80.7 million, while Trump spent just $24.3 million. Billionaires, meanwhile, are backing both Trump and Harris. Trump's top donor is Timothy Mellon, who's given a staggering $115 million to support him. Other big names supporting Trump include Kelsey Warren, Diane Hendricks. In fact, Tesla's Elon Musk is also in the mix, but has denied claims of a $45 million monthly donation. On the flip side, Biden's billionaires like Michael Bloomberg and Reid Hoffman have shifted their support to Kamala Harris. She's also got backing from Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings, former Meta COO Sheryl Sandberg and Melinda French Gates. Plus, over 100 venture capitalists, including Mark Cuban, Vinod Khosla, and Chris Sacca, have publicly supported Kamala Harris. Overall, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have spent $329.5 million this cycle, while Donald Trump has spent $117.2 million. But don't count Trump out. His campaign is stepping up, recently making a $12 million ad buy in key battleground states, the biggest since the primaries. But with both campaigns amassing significant funds and gearing up for a fierce battle, the next few months will be crucial in shaping the final push to Election Day in the US. We're keeping a close eye on how these dynamics will play out as we approach the November showdown. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.
And well, one of the defining issues as far as the swing states are concerned has become the Israel-Gaza war. In fact, we saw in Kamala Harris's nomination acceptance speech as well. She said that, of course, she will always stand for defending the rights of Israel's right to defend themselves, but she also said that what's happening in Gaza is absolutely devastating. Well, this as Trump's attack was also well timed. He said that Kamala Harris is Israel's biggest enemy. So, of course, those were words there. But why is it such a defining issue? Joining me on Election Watch this evening, I'm being joined by Edward P. Joseph, who's a lecturer at the Johns Hopkins University. Also with me, Robert Shapiro, who is an American political scientist. Thanks, gentlemen, for being with us. Professor Joseph, going across to you first. Why is the Israel-Gaza war such a defining issue, particularly in the swing states?
First of all, I would not say it's a defining issue. I would challenge the premise of that question. What we saw at the Democratic National Convention was the contrary. We saw that there were other issues. And,
yes.
and at the top of the list, of course, are economic issues, which are most concerned. And the other element that we saw at the Democratic National Convention, which was very successful by really any objective account, is that there were not these disturbances and that were so feared and that had happened in the past at a notorious Democratic National Convention in 1968 in Chicago, that it didn't really come to pass, that there were not this overwhelming protests, and nor do we see in swing states, plural, nor do we see that this is a top issue. It's a concern in a swing state, which is Michigan, but we've seen that Kamala Harris, the message that she gave, that you quoted there from her acceptance speech, by and large, seems to be accepted across the Democratic Party. It may not please every single voter or every single organizer, but she has managed to, as we use this expression, thread the needle, in which she expressed solidarity with Israel and the families in particular of the hostages, and noted the brutality of the attacks on October 7th, and at the same time, as you also quoted, expressing solidarity with Palestinians and their legitimate right for dignity, security, and a state of their own in their own homeland in the Middle East, side by side with Israel. So that posture, for the moment, seems to be successful, and we're not seeing a lot of discussion and focus on this issue at this point in the campaign. Please.
Oh, that's an interesting point there. It's certainly not the defining theme, but what you said about Kamala Harris's messaging on the Israel-Gaza war, it seems to have worked, is what you're saying. Mr. Shapiro, would you agree with that assessment?
I agree with everything that Edward Joseph has just said, with one caveat and a little bit of data here. We're talking about an election that's going to be very close. 2016 was decided by 77,000 votes in the three key states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. In 2020, it was decided by 40,000 votes in the swing states. So small numbers of votes matter. And the key data here, reflecting Edward Joseph's comments, is the proportion of people of the public that thinks Gaza is the most important problem in the election is around 1%, and it's around 1% in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Now, that 1% could matter in those states in a very close election, particularly among Arab American and Palestinian American subgroups. Also, the groups to watch, especially given the turmoil on campuses, are young voters. In those key states, based on a New York Times Siena poll, 4% of young voters 18 to 29 think Gaza is the most important issue facing the election. Also, among minority voters, 4% of blacks think it's the most important vote. So in a close election, those small percentages could matter. But the big question here is, to what extent has Kamala Harris changed the dynamic here, as Edward Joseph has said?
That's an interesting point. In fact, Mr. Joseph, as far as Mr. Biden was concerned, he was seen as perhaps more pro-Israel in simplistic terms. And Kamala Harris is somebody who's seen perhaps more vocal about the Palestinian self-determination and also in talking about what's happening in Gaza. In fact, we've seen, protests for Gaza and pro-Palestinian protests, so to speak, across top universities in the West and in America particularly. So, how do you see that shift from Mr. Biden to Kamala Harris perhaps being more vocal about the Palestinians' right to self-determination?
Again, and first I salute Mr. Shapiro with the impressive data that he provided to back up his argument, and it's very clear when he notes exactly that 1%, you have a 1% for whom this is a key issue. And I agree with the thrust of your question, which is that what Kamala Harris has managed to do is inject a change of tone. And this is really remarkable. And this is this is truly an accomplishment, even in this barely month-plus period that she's been the candidate. That she, by using a change in tone, she has managed largely to sidestep the question of policy, that is, of the substance. So it's the change in tone, one in which, in particular, after the meeting that she held and President Biden held with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that she conveyed a seriousness, a concern, and a willingness to hold Prime Minister Netanyahu accountable. And this change in tone, I think, has translated remarkably well to the electorate. Now, there's one other thing here we should talk about, which is real life. So as we discuss this, these discussions, these negotiations continue over a ceasefire in Gaza. And they, based on the reports I've read, they seem to be serious in the sense that they're looking at very fine, granular detail about it. And if the Biden administration manages to pull this ceasefire off, and Kamala Harris has repeatedly stated herself how vital it is and how she is involved as well in these discussions. And if the administration pulls off this ceasefire, that will have a huge impact, not only obviously on the conditions there, which are obviously so serious for so many people, but also will help her enormously here on this topic and more widely in her campaign. Please.
Okay, and Mr. Shapiro, come in on this point, because just loud thinking here. How do you see U.S.'s war strategy, in a sense, vis-a-vis the Israel-Gaza conflict, changing? In both scenarios, if Trump comes to power and if Harris comes to power, how do you see the strategy changing going forward?
Well, at this point, there doesn't seem to be much difference between how Biden's proceeding in terms of defending Israel and the position taken by Trump and presumably by a Trump administration here. The one thing I want to add here we haven't talked about is how this is affecting the Jewish vote in the United States, especially given that Trump appears to be a more stronger backer of Israel and opponent of anti-Semitism than the Democrats and Biden. And this is an open question. I haven't seen the available data on that, but there's not much. With regard to policy differences, I don't really see that much at this point, and which is ironic here, because if there are voters who vote against the Democrats because of the Gaza issue, voting for Trump isn't going to lead necessarily to a change in policy. But the voters who are voting against the Biden would be voting against the Democrats would be doing so because they feel betrayed and they don't care who wins the election.
So that's an interesting point, and Professor Edward, would like to weigh in on that, because the Republicans have sort of consistently tried to, in a sense, woo Jewish Americans, and they have failed, as many would say. But historically, the Jewish Americans have always voted for the Democrats.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But again, it remains an open question, especially in the context of anti-Semitism on college campuses, which has had a big effect on Jewish Americans.
Professor Edward, would you like to make a point on that?
Yes, I think with Trump, it's he has damaged himself, Donald Trump, on this effort. First, by opening the door to so many right-wing nationalists and in fact, some who are outright racists. He has opened the door, and he has had this notorious meeting, a dinner, and I will not mention the name deliberately, with one of the most notorious anti-Semites. And some of...
Okay, we seem to have lost that line with Professor Edward there, but Mr. Shapiro, the last word to you. How do you see this issue, in a sense, panning out in the battleground states?
Well, a lot depends on two things. One is what happens on the ground in Gaza, as Edward has emphasized. And secondly, how Kamala Harris is able to kind of burn the candle at both ends, so to speak, to appeal to the opponents of U.S. policy and also the supporters of current U.S. policy. It's a big open question, and this is a big arithmetic problem in the general election that we have to watch.
All right. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Okay, I see Mr. Edward back with us. Yes, Mr. Edward, you had a point to make.
Yes, thank you very much. So I was saying that in terms of trying to appeal to Jewish voters, Donald Trump has been his own worst enemy on this by his own appeals to the right-wing nationalists in the U.S. and this, as I mentioned, this dinner that he had at Mar-a-Lago with one of the most notorious blatant anti-Semites in the country.
Right.
So he has not helped himself. He's raised a lot of questions among Jewish voters about his own, the sincerity here that he has on this topic. And in terms of actual policy on the war in Gaza, it's, I think, very important to remember the meeting that happened, recent meeting in Mar-a-Lago with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Donald Trump. And in that meeting, Donald Trump offered nothing different from the Biden-Harris administration on the war in Gaza. He continued to deliver the message to Netanyahu that this war is damaging Israel. So he did not try to, he made criticisms of Kamala Harris, of course, but on the actual question of the war, he had nothing different to say. He did not criticize.
Right, so he's been non-committal as far as that is concerned. I think that's very well put. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us. I'm afraid I'm completely running out of time, but it'll be interesting to see how this issue actually pans out as US heads for the race to the White House. But now a final report. Well, is Trump planning an overhaul of his campaign? Of course, Trump is focusing increasingly on counter programs to, in a sense, counter Kamala Harris. The big focus, of course, remains immigration. But is there a change in his campaign strategy? Take a look at this report.
Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation.
It's safe to say that the Democratic National Convention was a rousing success for the party. In order to counter that, the Donald Trump campaign is set to overhaul its strategy, reports CNN. The plan is to aggressively ramp up the former president's schedule, brush up his debate skills, and cultivate a new strategy for the early voting states. According to the report, Trump is expected to hold several events each week, and he is expected to regularly visit 2 states a day. Trump is reportedly not keen on a traditional debate preparation and has argued that he doesn't need formal preparation. Former Hawaii Representative Tulsi Gabbard has been working with Trump to help him understand Kamala Harris's debate style. September will shed light on the kind of changes the Trump campaign has actually undergone in the wake of the DNC success. With Vishal Vivek for NDTV World, Bureau Report, NDTV.
So, well, an interesting conundrum there as the race for the White House only heats up. Well, all the updates here on the US Election Watch on NDTV. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.